want to say how glad we are to have Stan Tenen here. We haven't seen him half enough this year, and we're very much interested in what he has to say. The alphabet, of course, is interesting, and he always is interesting. So I'm very happy to introduce Stan Tenen. I guess you know he is research manager of the MERU Foundation, and a wonderful thinker.
Thank you.
Thank
you, Ruth. Thank you all for coming. As Ruth mentioned, I'm the Director of Research for the MERU Foundation, and this is, I guess, one of a continuing series of discussions of the work that we've been doing on the Hebrew alphabet and the text of Genesis in the Hebrew Bible. I'm going to review quickly the early work after we get into things. So for people who haven't seen any of this before, I'll try to go through it pretty quickly. And then I have a whole list of things that I'm going to try to accomplish. There's no chance that we'll do them all. But I want to reserve two chunks of time. One, to very carefully go through the meaning of the Hebrew letters, and as you'll see, the hand gestures that we're saying appear to generate the Hebrew letters. And then I also, because this is such a good audience usually, I'd really like to leave time to do some questions and to get into some of the philosophical issues and some of the implications of the work. I think what I'd like to do, rather than continue, for those who haven't heard this before, is to review the basic ideas from which all this came. And I'm going to do that by just starting at the beginning and going very quickly, because most people here, I think, have seen it. If you look at the first verse of the Hebrew text of Genesis, if I can get the light to not make a shadow for me, here's the first verse of Genesis in Hebrew. And what you find is, if you count the letters in base 3 count, and there's a paper in the pack that you've got that describes this in more detail, you find that there are sets of letters that are mirror image locations. This is in base 3, this is the 201th letter, this is the 102th letter. You could consider those Cartesian coordinates, and you could put the letters on a Rubik cube. If I don't twist the cube, it'll actually line up properly. And the letters that have these mirror image counts to them are in mirror positions on the cube. And so the L and the R, the 201 and the 102, are mirror positions against the main diagonal of the cube. And so there's something about L's and R's, to use the English equivalent names, and T's and F's, and E's and M's, and B's and I's, if I might. I'm not always using the phonetic equivalent. I'm using a different system. That enables you to associate them. And when you do, you find all of this is the first letter of the text of Genesis. So this is the first use of any letter as you go along. All of these letters in these sets are introduced in the same order: R, R, L, R, T, T, F, T, E, E, M, E, and this group is reversed because it's strung between the front and the end of the verse. It's flipped over. And you also find, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, but I wanted you to have the paper. These are draft papers. That this paper that you should have a copy of here, someplace. What you find is that you can use these groups, these triplet groups, and you can write the first verse of Genesis out on a bead string, on a bead chain, write each letter on a bead, and curl the chain up until the letters line up with each other. You just make the curl tighter and tighter until the letters all line up, and you stop. And when you do that, you end up with a pattern, this pattern here, where all the letters are paired up, and the letters that are not the same that are paired are these base 3 reciprocals in symmetrical positions on the Rubik cube in the alphabet. Just in case the T is a 210 letter and the F is the 012 letter, Tav and Vav. The same with the R and the L, the same with the E and the M over here. And all the others are paired properly. This last letter is paired as it's shown on the chart. So when you make exactly 6 turns and then 1 turn up through the middle, all the letters line up with each other. And the question is, what does this describe? Well, we know from mathematics that a torus, a donut, a bagel, Arthur's torus, well, here, let me use the big one that doesn't make so much noise, can be mapped out with 7 colors. And if one makes these 7, this is a kind of worn out model. The ones that Arthur Bloch sells new are more flexible in this. This one's been through the wars. These 7 colors could, in a sense, correlate with those 7 turns. Now that's not exactly right. There's more detail there, but this was our first jump on it. And when you make the 7 color map and you make all the regions, when they're stretched the same way, the same size and shape, you end up with a spiral that has 3 turns to it, exactly. And there's 2 ways you can arrange it. One is it has 3 turns around for each turn through the hole. And the other form, and it's the black line here, it's 3 times through for 1 time around. And both of these are 7 color maps. They both are mathematical definitions of the surface of a donut, of a torus. And you should read Arthur's Reflexive Universe if you want to know everything there is to know about the torus. It was better said than I could say it. So the first thing we discovered is that the first verse of Genesis fits on the surface of a torus, a donut, and all the letters pair up. We tried the second verse. I didn't bring it because it's a big chart. It's a much longer verse, but the letters pair up. The third verse is shorter, and it's easy to see, and I modified the torus a little, but you were sort of looking down through the coil this way. And again, you see how the letters pair up very symmetrically, and the same kind of pairs hold. There has been statistical work done on the Hebrew Bible that shows that there is patterning at the letter level. The people who did the work initially came to the conclusion that this proved that the text could only have been written by some divine source. And the academic true non-believers who looked at the same data said that this proved that people must have edited the story to make the patterns, and this proved that only man could have written it. My feeling is that both groups are biased. The data is good. There is patterning in the Hebrew Bible. There may be patterning in the Christian Bible, and there is patterning in the Quran. But that the people examining this with prejudiced views are not being intellectually honest. That this is neither a proof that God did it, nor is it a proof that man did it. Before you can say what it is, you have to figure out how it was done and understand, not just from the statistics, but from the process involved, where it came from. I think we are on to doing that with what we're doing here, but that's for later. So we found a way of making a model of the first verse of Genesis that fit on a donut. And then the question is, well, that's nice, but why would they do that? What's the point of it? Well, you don't really need the whole donut. Let me use this one again. The 7 color map is enough to specify the donut. In fact, you don't even need the 7 color map. All you need is the vortex. And if you make the vortex in a particular way, which is something I'll show you as we go on, it's not this one, where the outside comes parallel to the equator. It's a little like this one, where the outside is a little more tipped. It's not thin like a bagel. It's like a living torus, an apple, a fruit. You see, in Genesis 1:11, and in the introduction to the Zohar, the Kabbalistic text, they refer to a fruit tree yielding fruit whose seed is in itself. It's as if there's a circle of little spheres, the seed pack, inside of the meat of the fruit, a bigger sphere. Now we know if we're modeling something hyperdimensional, if we want to make a hypercube, we put a little cube inside of a big cube and connect up the corners. We call it a tesseract. And the in to out direction is the hyperdirection. We know, therefore, the same can be true of a sphere. If you have an in sphere and an out sphere, you have a hypersphere. As Arthur has shown, you can model a hypersphere as a torus. So again, we're very consistent. If you punch out the seed pack and the flower and the stem, you end up with a thick donut. I didn't bring the model that I usually bring, but this will serve. And it can fall through itself just like this does, and it has a hole down the middle. And except the cross-section is different. The cross-section is more like what we have here. It's this sort of elliptical cross-section, more or less elliptical. Like a fruit, like a real fruit. And we found eventually that if we took off just the edge of the vortex and we shaped it just so, we ended up with a shape that looked like this. Now, there's a lot more to this than I just told you. One thing that's distinctive is that this doesn't come parallel to the equator. It comes down perpendicular to the equator. Eventually, we discovered that the torus was a little more complex, that in fact the best way to define this shape was off of a so-called torus knot. This is the 310 torus knot, the one that's in the poster. And the reason why this is of interest, as you can see from what's up on the wall, is that if you look at this form from different directions, you can see all shadows, two-dimensional outlines of all the Hebrew letters. We're pretty sure the same form, or some very, very closely related form, produces the Arabic letters, and a related form, but not quite the same, produces the Greek letters. And so we've got the first verse of Genesis folding itself up into a form that when you look at the form from different directions, makes all the letters in which the text is written. So the question becomes, why would anybody do that? And we'll talk about that. Another thing that comes from the first verse of Genesis is not only does it fold itself up into this vortex form, but it also folds itself up into a tetrahedron. In fact, Hebrew is really tricky. This three-letter combination, Beit Resh Aleph, is the same as this one here. Here it's translated created. Here, this is the first word translated in the beginning, Bereshit. But if we broke the word up into bara and then shis, we would have created whatever this word means. Well, that word means either six or a thorn. Six-edged thorn. So it could very well be even in the word level. When you look at the thorn, you notice it is entirely symmetrical. It's the lowest order, most compact, most symmetrical form in 3 dimensions. If you look at this vortex form, it's entirely asymmetrical. There's no two ways you can look at it where to look the same. The contrast between symmetry and asymmetry is as ultimate a contrast as any possible. It's a yin-yang contrast. It's a fundamental distinction. It's a primary distinction. Now, we know that a mathematician named Spencer Brown wrote a book called Laws of Form, which I talked about before. Thank you. It's our timekeeping. And the Laws of Form, Spencer Brown says, let's see, I think it's quoted in one of the older TORUS journals, that you can make a whole reality by simply making a mark that distinguishes inside from outside. And either Spencer Brown or other mathematicians have proven that you can derive all of formal mathematics, all formal logic, from that mark of distinction, the distinction between inside and outside. The Hebrew letter Beit represents the distinction between inside and outside. Beit means a house. It distinguishes between inside and outside. Our little vortex can be placed inside of our tetrahedron, making a light in a meeting tent, an eternal flame hanging on 3 chains in front of a sanctuary in a synagogue or in a church, a green flame of Islam, if you like, in the Muslim tradition. The flame inside and the tetrahedron outside is again a model of inside and outside, a model of logical structure and continuous dynamic process, a rigid masculine logical structure, a continuous cyclical feminine process? Or is it a feminine vessel with a penetrating masculine form inside? Which is yin and which is yang, which is masculine, which is feminine, depends on your perspective. They're not absolutes. It's the contrast that's an absolute. It's the distinction that's important. Otherwise, you have to keep track of your convention. So we found a model of primary distinction geometrically. We identified it as capable of generating all of formal logic, which is a pretty big job. And we find it at the beginning of the text of Genesis, both at the letter level, at the word level, and at the level of the whole first verse. Well, of course, there's a teaching. And the teaching is that the text of the Bible, given by God in this teaching, is structured in a very interesting way. It's said that the secret of the universe is in the first letter of the sacred text. But if you can't figure it out from the first letter, God is very merciful and repeats it for you in greater detail in the first word, in the first verse, in the first chapter, in the first book. It's a hierarchical array. At least that's what's being described. We are discovering that they're telling the truth. If you look at a newborn child after it's finished getting born and necessities, and assuming it's not swaddled, the child is lying there in the crib, and it ends up wiggling its hands and fingers in front of its eyes. I think that's pretty universal. I don't know, does anybody not think that that's universal, hasn't observed something like that? What's the child doing? Well, it's doing something absolutely essential. You see, most of us, I can't do it. I don't know which internal feeling wiggles my ears. I never connected up that muscle. But a newborn child's got a whole bunch of internal reality. It can move its limbs in the womb even. So there's a connection between internal feeling and the ability to move. But of course, in the womb, there's no outside. The child doesn't hear, doesn't see, doesn't smell. It can connect it, but there's no reference. It doesn't come back. In order for the child to know what, where, how, who its hands are, it has to project a feeling that moves its fingers, and then it has to see it's actually moving its fingers, not moving its toes or its nose or something. It has to sense with its external senses, see with its eyes, smell with its nose, hear with its ears, at the same time as it's internally moving its own hands. That cross-correlation between external senses and internal feelings is what creates the incarnation. That's what incarnates us. Now, we don't do it only with our hands. The hands are our archetype. We obviously move the rest of our bodies, and all, etc. And I remember as a very young child, I really couldn't tell if I had bitten my tongue or bitten my lip. I had to feel it sometime. I just couldn't sort that one out. I hadn't done that. I think that's probably fairly common, that there are feelings you don't know which toe it is sometimes. You have to work it out. You have to check it out. So the process of cross-correlating internal and external feelings is, in fact, what we mean by being incarnate. It's how we know we're here. So the hand, which is the archetype for all of this, is central. The principle it represents is central. Our speech centers, Broca's regions and Wernicke's regions, are taken from the cortex that controls the hand. So our speech, our alphabet, which is related to our speech, obviously, is naturally connected to our hand gestures. And it's been clinically demonstrated that in young children that are learning language, hearing impaired children learn hand gestures using the same neural maps as normal hearing children do. And I think that stands to reason too. So we're dealing with something very fundamental to reality when we're dealing with our hand. I didn't bring the quotes this time. I think they're with the other videotape. But basically, Maimonides, in the Guide to the Perplexed, explains a statement that's in the Psalms, I believe, where it says that a righteous person is supposed to be aware of God at all times. And the rabbis, in their natural way, say, well, how are you supposed to do that? That's very nice, but how do you do that? And the answer is, the way you can be aware of God at all times is to be aware of your hand at all times because of the ease of its motions. What that means is, if you're aware of how you're projecting your conscious will into the external world, primarily by means of your hands, you could use your foot too, then you're aware by analogy of how God in principle is projecting the universe from God's will, and thus you're aware of God. And in Kabbalistic teachings, the universe is said to be projected from God's will as distinct from God's essence. You don't spill your guts on the outside when you move your hand, you just indicate what's on your mind. So it's not your essence that you're giving. I really want to go through all these hand gestures. And I want to go through these meanings. And I want to show how they're related to Arthur's turn, which we talked about in previous discussions, and how when you take the turn with its 7 levels in this mirror image form and embed it as process between unity and wholeness, between the seed and the fruit, you end up with a 9-stage system extending in 3 levels, 9 stages. An archetypal level, an internal spiritual level, and an external physical level. And you can lay out the meaning of all of these Hebrew letters based on the logic of Arthur's 7th cycle on the torus. And we've discussed that on previous occasions also. And so what we've done is assign these meanings logically, discovered that, in fact, they fit the historical understanding of the meaning of the letters, except instead of looking like these old Canaanite letters, these old pictograms, which derived from pagan idols, an ox, the Taurian ox of the solar god of the Taurian age, which was absolutely unacceptable to monotheists, the Hebrews and later the Christians and the Muslims, they had to replace the picture of an ox, or the picture of these different pagan images, which derives from these pagan images, with a gesture, a hand gesture, that had the same basic meaning, but was non-idolatrous. So instead of the solar deity being an ox, a pagan symbol, one takes one's hand, if I can put my pointer down and pick up another pointer, and points to one's solar plexus, one's own solar center. Up here, we see some traditional views. Here's how Arthur laid out the 12 houses of the zodiac on his combinational cycle, on the Rosetta Stone of Meaning. Here's Arthur's Rosetta Stone. This is from the Geometry of Meaning, and I think it's probably also in the Reflexive Universe. This circle of 12 houses with these natural meanings are the same as this circle of 12 fingers, are the same as this circle of the zodiac, this solar center mapped out on the person standing there in the place of the tree. The person is hung on the tree. I think we've heard that story a few places. Likewise, I brought along, this is, I think from a church someplace. I don't know. I've never really seen one used, but I guess it's what they served the wafer from or something. Someone sent this to me. But what you can see, what it really is it's the top half of this. It's this part here and this earth plane here. Now, I'm using it as a model. I'm not saying that that's what this was intended to be. But what we've got is this cup, this chalice in the middle. You see, this is this wine cup, this chalice, this grail cup. Yeah. And so, of course, the grail legends fit the same model, too. Nobody walk into that. And so this is the top of the top or the bottom of my apple. And here, this is a broken one, but you can see how pretty it is when you make it really carefully. This is the hand. This is also the wing of the cherubs sitting on top of the ark cover. In fact, we've got a computer graphic that shows that, and I'm not sure where it is in my pile. I think it's worth taking a moment to find it. Yes, here it is. The upper picture is the hand model. The lower picture, if you turn it sideways, these are the two cherubs with their wings and the fiery point in the middle from which God supposedly speaks, from which the projection, the seed center from which the projection takes place. And these will be available eventually. So that these traditional Rosicrucian type images, and here we have their dove's wings, well again, wing, flying wing. All of the symbolism, here's another Greek gods on a zodiacal plate. Here we have an alchemical wedding. We have the sun and the moon, the sun and the moon. This is the rivers. It's the Mari, otherwise known as Mary in the Christian story. And this is the solar deity. And this from above is the star coming down, or sitting at the center. And this three-way cross in the middle is our triple cross. Well, I've got more of it in here than we need. Forget about the yellow lines. It's the purple lines that define the cross angles of the tetrahedron. It's, again, this six-sided thorn. So that they all come together in the same basic model. Put some of these things away. Now, let's just go through the letters, because otherwise I'm going to run out of time, and I really do want to talk about some other things, too. And there's a whole section I didn't get to, which I hope I'll get to. I'm going to use, instead of the full hand, because it's a little hard to see which edge it is, I'm going to use the thinner one, the finger width one, and I'm going to use my right hand, This is a soft old model, and I'm going to use my left hand. Now, what I see in my right hand, from my eye's own point of view, you could see in my left hand if you look through the model into my eye. Of course, sometimes my hand is down here and you have to be on the floor to do that, so I'm going to have to pick it up to show it to you. But basically, we're going to go through all of these gestures. Now, the table here is arranged in what is known as Atbash. A against T, B against S. It's an acronym. It means compare the front to the back of the alphabet in pairs. I can't quite show it to you yet because I haven't finished doing the work. But it appears that each one of these pairs is paired on a different axis. And there are 11 axes. And that's part of the geometry that comes out naturally also. So let's go through it. I don't think I need to look at the chart. I think you can just watch me, and then you can watch the chart. And so you should be seeing in my left hand what's here, even though I'm seeing it in my right hand. When I put my hands to my solar plexus, meaning all one, centered, the center of the system, I see the Hebrew letter Aleph, meaning all, everything, archetype. When I open my hands in a birthing gesture, breaking open, I see the letter Beit. And again, you should be able to see. If you know the Hebrew letter Beit, you should be able to see it there. This is the Rashi Beit. Gimel. Gimel means camel. A camel goes back and forth between oases. Remember, we're in a desert culture here. Here's the water from the oases, and here are the two humps on the back of the camel. Back and forth. Relationship. Dalet. To pour down, to dispense. A delta is where the river widens, broadens out, and disperses the flow into the sea. Dalet pours down, pours out, dispenses, divides, dilutes, and dilates. Dalet, delta, dilate, dilute. All the same root. Hey means the frame. It's a window frame. I'm framing my head. I'm framing my shoulders. I've got my hands on my shoulders. Hey. Vav is over my spine. It's my spin axis. Now look, I don't have to see my hand. I can always see my hand in my mind's eye, even if it's behind my head. No problem. Zion means to project. Well, anybody can see I'm projecting. Spooky. Well, wait, no, it's St. Patrick's Day, not Halloween. It's projecting. Trance-walking. Zion. Chet means to encompass or to encircle. Well, down at my perimeter, if I look under my hand, I see the letter Chet. Tet is to hold the hole in your hand. Yud is me, I, my personal consciousness, me. Kaf is the palms of my hand. Lamed is to learn, to abstract. It's the flame. You see, here's the flame, and it's reflecting right back into me, right back into my eyes. I should be on my other hand. Here's the flame, here's the reflector. This is Aladdin's lamp. You hold it in your hand, you rub it, and you go into the meditation from which the magic manifests. There's the crescent, and there's the star in the Islamic scheme. Got as far as Lamed. Mem means source. The source of speech is at the throat. And there's the mem. Nun is a neck or a nexus. It connects AM and PM. We call it noon. Nun. The fish in the middle of the water. Nun. It's just this arc here, just the arc part. Samak means to support or sustain. If I make a cradling motion, I see my samak hanging there in my hand. And we're just going down. Where we are now is coming up the bottom, and we're up to here. This is samak. Ayin means eyes, and so I put blinders on my horse. I'm the horse. There's the ayin, sitting right here. Eyes, projection, sight line, sighting, ayin. Pei means mouth. If you don't want to break your wrist, the only way you're going to see the pei is to put your hand to your mouth. Sadi means righteous, upright, clean hands, upright. Kuf is a monkey. I'm dangling from a tree limb. Reish is my head, raise, to project, raise. Shin is to shine, and Tav is myself. Notice Tav is the opposite of Aleph. Notice, I'll do it with one of them. This is the letter Shin in Hebrew. It's supposed to pair with Beit, right? Now, that's not drawn as well as it might, but we just turn it around, and there's our bait. Did I get those right, or I have them backwards? Wait a minute, I think that must be sheen to you. That's sheen, and this is bait to you. All right, great. Remember, front and back? Okay. Now, you don't really need the models to do it. You could look at the chart and just put your hands. In fact, we think that this older elephantine version of the letters is actually the outline of the hand itself without even holding the model, except that it's become stylized, and I don't think that's a good sample of the letters. Now, it's very important which style of alphabet we're looking at. The modern Hebrew letters are a little small here, are these more square letters. The letters we're making are a more fluid form of the same alphabet. The far right column is from a papyrus that was found on Elephantine Island. It's where the Suez Canal is now. I don't remember which is the red and which is the dead anymore. Red Sea? Red Sea, obviously. And is from 300 BCE. These are samples of the letters as they were known in Islamic Spain. And this column here, the second one from the left, second one in the boxes, is the actual handwriting of a rabbi, Nachmanides. Nachmanides debated with Pablo Cristiani under King James II of Aragon around 1200 in a disputation forced upon Nachmanides by the Inquisition. And during the disputation, the question of who's the Messiah comes up. Seems to be an issue between the Christians and Jews during the Inquisition, obviously. Nachmanides admits that it says in the scripture that the Messiah is born when the temple's destroyed. And since the temple was destroyed, in their case, about 1,200 years earlier, the court asked Nachmanides, so where's the Messiah? And he says, well, just because someone's born doesn't mean that's when they become known. He said, well, look, man, 1,200 years. I mean, this guy's getting a little old. So where is he? He says, well, the teachings are that the Messiah is waiting, is always available, is waiting in Pardes, in paradise. Now, that's very interesting because about the same time, maybe 100 CE, really about the beginning of the Christian era and the time when there was all kinds of difficulties, there was a rabbi named Akiba, one of the principal authors of the Talmud, the Oral Torah, and also supposedly one of the authors or redactors of the Sefer Yetzirah, the book of formation that describes the formation of the alphabet. And Akiba was known as the master of the alphabet, the Balei Ha'otayot, the master of the letters. And Akiba is described in the Talmud as having achieved great levels of meditational skill, which was still permitted those days. This was while the rabbis were still meditating, and it was before the Nicene Council, which threw all this stuff out of Christianity also. Akiba is said to have gone in meditation to Pardes, to paradise. And he went, I guess they went separately, but they all did it, with 3 friends, 3 other rabbis who were equally qualified. One was so overwhelmed by the ego-death experience in Pardes that he stayed there, died, didn't come back. Another one came back, but he had a bad trip. He came back psychotic. Third guy came back. He gave up his religion. He became a total heretic. But he was still considered so smart that they still quote him in the Talmud, even though he's dirt. But he's smart. Well, you know, you have your priorities. And Akiba comes back whole, and he's the hero, of course. He comes back, and I'm not sure of the historical temporal sequence here, but either before or after, because it had to be one or the other. Akiba comes back, and he appoints Ben Cassiba, the Jewish general then fighting the Roman wars against the Jews with the Romans, as Bar Kokhba. Bar Kokhba means son of the star. This is within, what, 100 years of the founding of the Christian religion. And here's a rabbi designating a Messiah who's son of the star. Again, strange story. Well, unfortunately, or we would have heard different, the Romans kill Bar Kokhba, and that ends the story. He doesn't get resurrected in this version. This is a different religion, Jewish version. The point is that Akiba goes to Pardes based on his knowledge of the alphabet, discovers the Messiah principle, and comes back and makes a statement about it. Nachmanides, 1,200 years later, is telling the Inquisition about this. So where's the Messiah? Where's this Mashiach effect, this out-of-body ego death, world-changing death and rebirth effect? It's in the meditation. Where's the meditation? The meditation's in the text, letter by letter, in the text of the Hebrew Bible. Perhaps also, although we don't, the Gospels have been translated, so it's not clear if you can do it at the letter level there. And also perhaps there's coding in the Quran. Is it throughout and in every case? I don't know. If it's like DNA, and they didn't have to know about DNA to know that DNA is logical. The structure of DNA was predicted before it was discovered. It was predicted mathematically based on information theory. And they didn't have our information theory, but they still had philosophical depth that could have given them the same information. DNA has dense coding and wide coding, so that you don't have to specify a direction with any one letter. It could be a sequence of letters that pointed it to a direction. You'd still have room to make any word you wanted. It's just that sum total of the letters would get you from here to there. The point is that the text, if one can follow the way, becomes the way to the Mashiach, Messiah experience, the ego death and rebirth experience. And if this is true, the only place that such a prophetic tradition, a science of consciousness, could credibly be stored and have come down to us has got to be in scriptural text. Nothing else has survived intact. It's the only sources that one is not allowed to change even the slightest part of any letter. And the Dead Sea Scrolls confirm that essentially there have been no changes. The essentially similar Samaritan version of the books of Moses doesn't contain this coding. The spellings are different. And there's a whole academic debate about that. I'm not going to do this with you. This is from a dictionary. This is an attempt to deduce, to find out if our interpretation of what the letters mean is actually consistent with what you find in a dictionary. So I took the suffix in Hebrew, yud nun, and listed all the words that are, all the three-letter words that end in yud nun. Each one has one letter of the alphabet in front, and we know what each letter means too. So we can, in theory, interpret these, decipher them. You can look at the comparisons for yourself. I think there's one or two I left out that either means I skipped it on the text editor or there was no word in the dictionary. What we find is it confirms the meaning. Yud is a pointer, your hand. Nun, as I said, is to connect, but a final nun is to connect with infinity, to go to the nth degree. Pointing to the nth degree is what we mean by going on or pointing or just the ing ending to something. And if you put the ing ending on the meaning of each of the letters at the beginning of the word, you get something that corresponds very closely to the dictionary meaning for the word. So the word, for instance, deen, justice, law and judgment. Dalet means dispensation, dispensing, dispensation of pointing the finger at, dispensing justice. We call it that. I don't know the pronunciation, I have the vowels here. Zayin Yud Nun means an arm, equipment, an axe, a spear, or a weapon. Zayin is a project, is to project, and Yud Nun is to go on. Yud Nun is to go on. To project and go on is what a weapon or a spear is. You can look at the list for yourself. So that takes us through the letters. It takes us through the letters based on a logical structure, which we described in the Matrix of Meaning for Sacred Alphabets tape, which we did here about 3 years ago, maybe a little longer now. The logical structure gives you the 27 pointing directions, which are equivalent, as you may see from something else I handed out, to the 27 lines that make up the Sri Yantra, the creation mandala for the Vedic tradition. 9 interlaced triangles. Now, I don't have a big poster of it. No, I don't have a big poster of it. But you have the drawings. And these 9 triangles can be decanted, as the little drawing shows, into these 9 triangles, which if I point them right at you, you should be able to see the Sri Yantra. I may have it upside down. You'll forgive me. If you look at it sideways, you'll notice that these tips all line up on a line, and these tips all line up. And the 2 lines form 2 parallels, and there's a center pin. These 9 are spiraling around on this line system in the same way as when I take my tetrahelical column and bend it around into this form. It's as if the triangles are spread around the whole circle, and you can look at your own drawings, and with the videotape will include the drawings. Let's see, I think I have them here too someplace. Let me shuttle through some of my notes and catch up a bit. Here's an interesting one. This is from the Mathematical Intelligencer, but it's a copy of something that was in Winfrey's book on chaos, on cardiac activity. This is a map of the timing cycle of the heart. It's, as you can see, the trefoil knot. It's one of the forms that produces this geometry. If we take, I use my shillelagh here. If we take this guy and we connect up the letters that form these base 3 pairs that pair off the letters in the alphabet, they make this swirl of triangles. This is exactly the same as the Rubik cube, except now it's on a form related to the alphabet directly and not a Rubik cube that didn't exist in those days. These 9 triangles should be the same as these. That hasn't been fully demonstrated yet, but we're getting closer and closer because you can see how you could flip this around. And for those who want to talk about the math, I'll show you what I think is going to happen, but I haven't finished drawing it yet. Those same 9 triangles also enable you to take the alphabet and connect the base 3 triplets that we're using for correlation with the traditional left-right Atbash pairs. And again, you get this 9 triangles strung on an umbilic toroid. This is explained to some extent in the TORUS journals that we handed out. So if you don't have this TORUS journal or the previous one, you can get it from there. And then, of course, there's this old drawing, which I used to have up on the wall, which I don't think I put up, no, and I didn't bother putting it up, where we made this shamrock, trefoil, tricoil form again, 3-coil form. Put the letters on it in alphabetical order, and on this form, I've drawn in these purple triangles. Those are the same 9 triangles, but now you're looking down into the torus. But those triangles are the same as the triangles here, these over here. So when you're looking at higher dimensional forms or complicated 3-dimensional forms, you need to look at many different views to get a sense of all the relationships. No one view is going to show you how everything is related. Okay, I think I was going to get to that. Now I want to show you something new, which is not fully developed yet either, but is really very interesting. For those of you who know something about the Kabbalah and about the Sefer Yetzirah and the Sephirotic tree, the tree of life in Kabbalah, if you take the 2 different 7-color maps and peel off the 2 different spirals, this one goes around 3 times for 1 time through the hole, this one goes through the hole 3 times for 1 time around, and you put the 2 of them together, assuming that the same handedness, you get this form. The white line is from the bigger toroid, and the blue line is from the smaller one. In fact, the blue line is the same as this green line. When you put them together, they intersect. They weave, they interleave, just like you were making a basket. They intersect in 10 places. Those 10 intersections are the 10 sphirot on the tree of life. And if you plug this model into the Sefer Yetzirah, and into the Kabbalistic texts, all the relationships that are described on the tree of life are confirmable. You can see why they made the claim, why they connected this idea to that idea and this idea to that idea. I'm going to write it up, and that'll be another presentation. But this breaks open the whole idea of the tree of life. And for those of you who've studied the Lurianic Kabbalah, there's a discussion of the 2 circulations that come together to make the tree. For some reason, nobody seems to have made this model recently. I'm sure they did in the past. So this is our tree of life model, which we're going to expand on. These 10 intersections probably, this isn't proven, correlate with these 10 points, which are the spin axes of the tetrahedron. Remember, the vortex and the tetrahedron are complements. They should stay complements as we grow them, if they're true complements. I have a list here. This doesn't prove anything. This is anecdotal. I have a list here of a few Hebrew words. I don't know how many people know Hebrew, but I'm not even going to tell you what the letters are, and you can figure it out from my hand motions. I'm going to move my hand between these letters, and you're going to tell me what the word means. Now, I did one last time, which is an easy one, and it's this one. As soon as you know what it is, just raise your hand or shout out. What am I describing? Remember, I'm Columbus, and I'm meeting the American Indians for the first time, and my diary says that I'm speaking to them in Hebrew because they're the lost tribes. Well, unfortunately, 1492 is when the Muslims and Jews were expelled from Spain, and they signed on the crew. And we know Rabbi Nachmanides, because he was from Portugal, knew these hand gestures for the letters. If Columbus's crew did this in front of the Indians, they would say Columbus was describing something that is round. Gimel Lamed means round in Hebrew. Now, if I did this, you'd know I meant to me, to Lamed, me, Yud. If I wanted to say come, I'm not asking you to guess them, I'm doing it quickly. Come, Beit Aleph, come to me. Let's see, which one do I want to do? Blah, 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 blah. Oh, these two are good if I can do them. These are opposites. One means open, the other means close. Okay? This is one of them, if I can do it right. And the other one is, you can see the motions are opposite. The first one was open, pa, tu, ach, and the second one was closed, se, gur, zipped up. In Hebrew, the word for a commandment from God is a mitzvah. It comes from the root tzva, tziva, which occurs, I believe, in Exodus. It's a command from God. Let me get it right. Tziva, to draw down righteousness. Righteous, over the spine, and extended over the shoulders. A commandment from God. I think that gives you an idea. There are a few more here, which if you want to ask questions, we can get to. Here is the lightning bolt that is said to descend the tree of life. You will find the same lightning bolt on this form, but I'm not going to show it to you now. We'll save that for next time. And one other pretty thing. This is known as Dini's surface. It's a mathematical form. Everything nests back at infinity. Every generational cycle connects to infinity directly down the middle, but each generation is separate on the outside. This is the masculine path, cut off and circumcised at every generation. This is the feminine path, umbilic to umbilic, womb to womb, endlessly. They are orthogonal. They're at right angles to each other, and yet they form a whole continuum. A flower within a flower within a flower, onion skin, shells, 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 layer on layer on layer. Vortex on vortex on vortex. Here we have a pentagonal spiral in 2 dimensions that becomes an octahedral pyramid in 3 dimensions. If we put this on the tip of the pyramid, this square form, and pull it out, it becomes a tetrahelix in projective 4 dimensions. You can always trade dimensionality for symmetry. 5 symmetry in 2D, 4 symmetry in 3D, 3 symmetry in 4D. And of course, this is also, I forget the bottom part, the vortex. And in fact, out of this cornucopia comes all the Platonic solids, all of the symmetries. They flow naturally, one after another, as you open up the hand. The whole gamut of Platonic and Archimedean solids tumbles out, in order, out of the vortex, out of the, what do they call it? It's cornucopia, horn. Let's talk a little philosophy here. One of the principles of mystical teaching, of spiritual teaching, of a science of consciousness, is that you have to somehow bring yourself into resonance with that which you're studying. You have to obliterate that separation between foreign and self. You have to identify with the feelings going on. Whether it's following the way in the Tao, the way, whether it's following the way in Judaism called halakha, which is the law, which is the ritual law, which is literally translated the way, or whether it's following the way of Jesus in Christianity. It's the same idea. There's probably an Islamic version of that too. I don't know the term. The way that's being talked about, the issue here is to make yourself like the model. Well, how do you make yourself like the model? Well, the model is really interesting. This hand model connects this inside to this outside. It unifies them in the hand, in one unity. In the Talmud, which is the written version of the oral companion to the written Hebrew Bible, which is not accepted by anything but Jewish tradition, but nevertheless goes back about 2,000 years also. It's taught, there's a phrase for a person of integrity. They're said to be toku kavaro. Toku is like our word take. It means take in. And kavaro is like our word bara, from here, creation. Bereshit, to project out, to create. A person who is toku kavaro, whose inside is like their outside, is morally transparent. Whether it's a righteous person, a tzaddik, or saint, Mother Teresa type, it's someone who's morally transparent. Their inside and their outside are the same. That's really the only qualification for doing this work or learning these ideas. It looks like a lot of mathematics, but the mathematics is only the spreadsheet. It's only the lattice for holding the information together and keeping it in a way that you can use it. The math by itself is sterile. It's only if we emulate the feelings that are being cataloged by the math that this can come alive and that we can deeply understand it. We can hear it inside, not just superficially, not just outside. All right. So the key to doing this work is to make oneself have a measure of integrity. I think it was Einstein that said, and I don't have the exact quote, but I'll get close to it. He said that you shouldn't judge a theory by the data. You should only judge a theory by its internal coherence. Internal coherence is integrity. Everything fits together in a harmonious and complete whole. A whole, a model of integrity. So the issue here is, how does one make oneself like the model? Well, there are many ways in which that happens. It's no secret, we know it already, the model is a model hand. The hand connects our inside and our outside. We can always see our hand in our mind's eye. If we pick something up behind us, we can feel it with our hand and bring the image into our mind. The hand is the human embodiment of a general principle that connects consciousness and physics, or physics and consciousness, inside and outside. So this is one model of integrity, if you will. It generates the whole alphabet. Part of this paper, the second part in the back, is a discussion of the Hebrew text Sefer Yetzirah. Now, Sefer Yetzirah, the book of formation, it's a Kabbalistic text. There are many different translations. The best one available today is one by Aryeh Kaplan, published by Sam Weiser, which you can get. In any event, it supposedly is a discussion of the creation of the alphabet. But if you read anybody's translation, you're not going to figure out how what they're talking about has to do with making the alphabet. However, if you plug these models and this interpretation in, you'll figure it out. One of the questions that's always come up is, how much math did they know in the old days? How could they have done this? Well, it's difficult to prove, for instance, that people knew about this interleave pattern. But if you look at the second verse of the Sefer Yetzirah, which is at least 1,000 years old, probably 2,000 years old, and may even be 3,000 years old, you find, and you can read this for yourself, the first verse of the Sefer Yetzirah reads, in translation, 10 Sfirot of nothingness, 22 foundation letters, 3 mothers, 7 doubles, and 12 elementals. Unfortunately, that first line, 10 sphirot of nothingness, doesn't tell you a lot. What's a sphirot and what's a nothingness? And if you look in various translations of Sefer Yetzirah, you find the key word that doesn't seem to work is the word belima in Hebrew, which is either one word or two words, and which has many different translations. What we did is realize that a text that's this old is just like a Bible text. It was probably written, almost certainly written, without vowelization. It was almost certainly written without word divisions, which means that you're free to break the text up into different word clusters if you want to. And if you do that, as you can read here, and break up the first phrase, which is Asar Sfirot Belima, into Asar Sofi, and then the letters Resh, Vav, Tav, Beit, Lamed, Yod, Mem, He, what you find is, if this is the Sofi, then these remaining letters are the letters listed. And the actual second verse of the Sefer Yetzirah says, make this woolly ball out of the letters that we've just discovered, make the woolly ball out of the first verse of Genesis. It's a little hard for you to have 8 letters, all coincidental, all connected together, fitting exactly where they are, and have it not be meaningful. It's a lot harder to make it non-meaningful than to see it as meaningful. So I've given these pages out, and people watching the videotape, if it comes out well, we'll make it available. We'll include this paper with the videotape so you can examine it. The idea is that there are, by idols, by the way, that's in quotes. I really don't mean that these are idols in the sense of simple graven images that simple people worship in the ways that our culture tends to put down. The idols I'm talking about are the cultural paradigms that we all live by every day. The beliefs in science, the beliefs in business, in our government, our way of seeing the world. These aren't false idols at all. They're reality. So I don't mean idols in the sense of false. I mean idols in the sense of embodiments of important spiritual truths as they're understood in different cultures. And when, as I presented previously, you dip below that stratum, that individual cultural level, and get down to the core, you find that there's an abstract level that appears to be common to all cultures, or at least to most, and certainly the higher and greater and more refined, the more they tend to converge. And people have proposed there have been common sources, too. Our model says that there may have been common sources for different cultural teachings, but that also they may have arisen independently and still be the same, because they're based ultimately on our self-aware form of consciousness. So the first thing I would like to do is to read you a poem, which you've probably all heard. I remember hearing it once or twice when I was in high school. And I'm going to walk through it and try to identify some of the terms with some of the sacred geometry that we have up here. But I'm not going to be able to do that first. I'm just going to read the poem. But see, as I say the words, if you can spot analogs to what I'm going to say in this drawing. We have here a kind of a fruit, a kind of an apple, a model of wholeness, an Orphic egg, a light in the meeting tent, a walking cypress tree to the Sufi tradition. There are 12 on the circle, and we'll see why that is. We're dealing with ideas about the alphabet. You could say that this is a river. This is an earth plane. Let me read it. This is Samuel Taylor Coleridge's Kubla Khan. And I'm not a very good reader, so bear with me. One of the first things that comes up is, what does the name Kubla Khan mean? I don't know for sure, but there's an interesting quality in Hebrew and in some other ancient languages, and that is that the vowels are left out, and that you can read the meaning from the consonants alone. So if we drop out the vowels of Kubla Khan, we get KBL and KHN. And this may be a silly coincidence. I really don't know. I haven't done the research. Most of the coincidences I'm going to tell you are not silly. This one may be silly. You could read that as Kabbalah Kohen. You could say that this is a description of something Kabbalistic from a priestly perspective. And as it turns out, when you get to the end of the poem, there's a kind of confirmation of that. So let me just read it and see what kind of imagery it brings up. In Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure dome decree, where Alf, the sacred river, ran through caverns measureless to man down to a sunless sea. So twice 5 miles of fertile ground with walls and towers were girdled round, and here were gardens bright with sinuous rills, where blossomed many an incense-bearing tree. And here were forests, ancient as the hills, enfolding sunny spots of greenery. But oh, that deep romantic chasm, which slanted down the green hill athwart a cederned cover, a savage place, as holy and enchanted as air beneath a waning moon, was haunted by woman wailing for her demon lover. And from this chasm, with ceaseless turmoil seething, as if this earth in fast thick pants were breathing, a mighty fountain momently was forced, amid whose swift, half-interred burst, huge fragments vaulted like rebounding hail, or chaffy grain beneath the thresher's flail. And mid these dancing rocks at once and ever it flung up momently the sacred river, 5 miles meandering with a mazy motion. Through wood and dale the sacred river ran, then reached the caverns measureless to man, and sank in tumult to a lifeless ocean. And mid this tumult Kubla heard from afar ancestral voices prophesizing war. The shadow of the dome of pleasure floated midway on the waves, where was heard the mingled measure from the fountain and the caves. It was a miracle of rare device, a sunny pleasure dome with caves of ice. A damsel with a dulcimer, in a vision once I saw, it was an Abyssinian maid, and on her dulcimer she played, singing of Mount Abora. Could I revive within me her symphony and song, to such a deep delight 'twould win me, that with music loud and long I would build that dome in air, that sunny dome, those caves of ice, and all who heard should see them there, and all should cry, beware, beware. His flashing eyes, his floating hair, weave a circle round him thrice, and close your eyes with holy dread, for he on honeydew hath fed, and drunk the milk of paradise. Now let me walk through it again and see if I can give you some sense of how what I just read might refer to what we're looking at. You should know that Samuel Taylor Coleridge was an opium addict, we are told, and he was financed in his poetry and writing by Thomas and Joshua and Hosea Wedgwood of the famous China fame. I think it says it on the copy. And he worked with people like Charles Lamb and William Wordsworth and Robert Southey, some of which were well known to have been involved in mystical pursuits. So they might have had an awareness of the model that we're talking about. And in an opium reverie, a poem describing the sacred geometry that we're saying is common to experience and cosmology might have been prompted by that cosmology. The poem might have been prompted. So Xanadu is an interesting word itself, except I don't remember the reference, so I can't go into that. But we tracked down a Hebrew word that actually makes sense of it. Do you remember what it was, Cynthia? We translate it anyhow. I could look it up in the dictionary, but I'm not going to do it now. A stately pleasure dome. Well, let's say that this is the dome. Alpha, Aleph, the alphabet. Sacred river. Of course, you could call the whole form a sacred river, and this is just the shadow of it on an earth plane. Caverns. Tower, walls, an incense-bearing tree. The central part is a tree, as those who've seen previous lectures realize that. And we're going to give other examples. A waning moon, the face down here, the bottom is a crescent, a waning moon. Floated midway on the waves, while this whole thing floats on this water level, this earthen level in the middle. Mount Abora, the beginning of the text of Genesis starts Bereshith, Bora sheath. And at the very end he says, weave a circle round him thrice. Well, you can't see it from there, but you can see it here. it literally has 3 rings that define it, 3 loops. And these 3 loops. So there's 3 loops around the form. And that's going to come in handy when we talk about other metaphors here. For he on honeydew hath fed. If you look in a Hebrew dictionary and look up what a honeydew is, try to find the closest reference to that, you get a word that refers to the manna that was given in the Exodus story. And the word in Hebrew that refers to a honeycomb, and the translation there is from Kaplan's translation of the book of Exodus, is tzapihat. If you take that letter by letter off our alphabet charts and look at what the word tzapihat means, it means the highest or the most complete mouth that points to something encircling itself. A mouth that points to something encircling itself. So our little honeydew, which turns out to be a melon, it turns out also, the word melon, I believe there's a reference buried in here someplace, which we'll get to later, is the same word as the word for fleece or wool in one of the languages that we're going to discuss. And so we're going to find that the search for the golden fleece in this Sufi, soft Sufa form is about this honeydew melon that's made up of wool. The word in Hebrew or Arabic for wool is saf or suf. Thus Sufis, thus sofa, meaning a storm cloud, which we talked about last year. Thus the Sufi round dance, the Ein Sof of the Kabbalistic tradition. All of them mean wool, fuzzy, puffy, cloud-like. So there's Kubla Khan, and he started us off. And I read that because I liked the poem, and I was surprised to find that in the classic piece of poetry that I had to read in high school, there was something Kabbalistic. I don't know how it snuck through. I guess they didn't see what I saw in it. One of the most important ideas is that what we're doing here seems to be very complex. It's got all this mathematical forms, these knots and everything. And think about it. The queen of the sciences is physics. The king is mathematics. The most subtle part of mathematics is topology, and topology is often done with knot theory. Now go back to the ancient world. What experimental medium was available? What did people work with? Did they have computers? No. Did they have our modern mathematical formalisms? No. Did they have algebra? No. Did they have calculus? No, we don't think so, maybe in some other form. What did everyone do? Well, they lived in tents, and they moved around in the desert, and they kept animals, and they raised crops, and they made ships occasionally, and they made carts and dragged stuff around and all of that. You don't have to be a mathematical genius. You just have to be a decent carpenter to know 2-legged stools fall over and 3-legged stools stand up. They knew that kind of math. You had to be able to make rope and tie knots and weave cloth and weave baskets, because that's what you put stuff in for your normal living. These are all weaving patterns. This is a wreath. It's not some fancy thing from some modern mathematical topology. This is what somebody making a wreath 3,000 years ago out in the desert would have probably done. They would have woven a bunch of straw or a bunch of cloth or a bunch of thread that they'd made up somehow, maybe even a bunch of wool, into a wreath, into a woven pattern. We're also going to see where they got the patterns from. So that the technology for doing this kind of stuff, this work, was available. Even much higher technology was available in some cases. Benoit Mandelbrot, the fellow who's given credit for the discovery of fractal mathematics about 15 years ago, 20 years ago now, about 20 years ago now, was asked who should get credit for bringing forth fractal mathematics. He wrote the foreword, I believe, to Peitgen and Saup's book, I'm not sure now, on fractals. And in the preface, he says, in the introduction, he says that credit for fractal theory, although obviously not for making the images because they didn't have the computers, goes to Archimedes. Archimedes was alive when the Hebrew Bible was first translated into Greek. about 300 years BCE. So yes, they had the mathematics. It wasn't in our form, but they had the subtlety, they had the sophistication. And that we're finding these patterns are woven patterns really means that they had all the means necessary. In fact, weaving is pre-literate. I mean, there were bardic traditions that went around, you know, weaving Persian rugs and moving through the Middle East well before anybody started writing down anything. At least that's what we think historically. I wanted to point out, and did we put it up? Maybe we didn't, maybe we didn't. I guess we didn't. Well, all right, I'll have to hold this guy up. Now, let's hold this one up, because you can see it clearly. It's got 3 little loops on it. This is our St. Patrick's Day shamrock. This is our 3-leafed clover in this case. So happy St. Patrick's Day to all of you who are celebrating St. Patrick's Day. St. Patrick, of course, drove the serpents out of Ireland. So maybe he was talking about this too. I don't know. That's pushing a little far. I read you the story on a previous occasion of Rumi's poetic description of the Mevlevi Sufi round dance. The Mevlevi Sufi tradition, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure this was in Gnosis magazine recently, originated in the Abkhazia region of what was previously Soviet Georgia, where there is now a rebellion and people are getting killed. If you look at a map as to where Abkhazia is, you find it's just across a little strait from Sebastopol in the Crimea, which is where the Ashkenazi, the European Jews, went when they left the Middle East, as opposed to the Sephardi Jews, which went out through the Mediterranean. And so there is really very little coincidence in Rumi's description of the Mevlevi round dance fitting the same description that we have found for the hand model, except to Rumi, the grain that no granary comprehends is this little seed in the middle. Now, did you ever see in the ancient world what a mill that grinds flour looks like? There are 2 big stones, one on the bottom and one on the top, like these 2 hemispheres. And there's a hole in the top, and you dribble the grain in, and you turn the stones, and between it, on this plane, the grain is ground. So this is our model millstone, Hamlet's mill. And there's the seed, the grain that no granary comprehends, because this is a meditational form. This is a spiritual form, not a physical one. Rumi talks about a walking cypress tree. Well, you can see this actually even looks a little like a cypress tree with its tangled, twisted roots, sitting below the water line at the bottom and springing up above, and its branches going in directions on the side. It's a walking cypress tree. He talks about a circle of dancers around the divine point. Well, out here we have 4 fingers, the thumb goes in the middle, and so if there are 3 hands on top, there'd be a circle of 12 fingers on this perimeter. Those are the circle of 12 dancers. They could be the 12 imams, they could be the 12 tribes, they could be the 12 houses of the zodiac, they could be the 12 apostles, they could be any of the other 12 around ones, 12 knights around the round table. Rumi also talks about a fountain of light. This is the fountain part. And he talks about a waterfall. This is the waterfall part. And so Rumi's description of the Mevlevi Sufi round dance appears to describe the same sacred geometry, except in the case of Rumi, one is supposed to be dancing it, making oneself like it. Well, there's the answer to where the path in Islam is, because the Sufis are mostly identified with the Islamic tradition these days. And the round dance is, in fact, a path one takes to make oneself like this first verse of Genesis, spinning around like this donut. Okay, let me continue. There's some more reading to be done here. But before I get to it, I wanted to make another point. I was talking with Professor Richard Rhodes at UC Berkeley the other day, in the linguistics department, I believe. I hope I'm getting that right. And he reminded me of something that he'd come across, I guess, a while ago. In the Japanese world, there is a tradition of samurai sword making. And what Richard pointed out is that you didn't really need to know how to make a samurai sword. All you did need to know was know how to follow the tradition exactly. That the ritual, even amongst people who don't know what they're doing, can serve to preserve the technology, the deep teachings. Now, that may be exactly what's happened in all of our modern religions, is that they're different embodiments of different ritual systems that make sense in different cultural contexts. If you follow them, you follow a path that embodies in you these spiritual feelings, these experiences. Whether in your mind's eye you're drawing your roof brain chatter down slowly to a single point of meditation, or whether you're the hero descending to the depths below the earth plane and then climbing the spiritual mountain in 7 sacred quests back towards your goal, in the external world, it's the same model. This is the model of the hero's journey, as Joseph Campbell's presented it on PBS over the last several years, well, until recently anyway. Let me read you from a few other traditions here, and I'm going to try to be brief. I think we've given you some of these quotations, and not all of them, though. This is from Germanic Mythology and the Fate of Europe by Ralph Metzner, printed in Revision, Volume 13, Number 1, in 1990. He's talking about Odin's 3 ways of knowledge. 3. There are 3 stories of Odin that illustrate the character of this wandering truth-seeker and magician. They exemplify 3 ways of knowledge that form part of the wisdom teachings of the ancient European peoples, ways of knowledge that we have for the most part lost and would do well to remember. The first story is told in the poem Havamal, Words of the High One, in which Odin recounts how he hung himself voluntarily in self-sacrifice from the world tree Yggdrasil, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, which is the axis mundi. There's a spin axis through this thing from the stem to the seeds. The central pillar axis of the world, W-O-R-L-D, W-H-I-R-L-E-D, world, I guess so, which holds all the various worlds of existence together in a unitary framework. There it is. To be hung from a great tree echoes ancient Asiatic shamanic initiation practices. And he goes on and on. And he also says, Odin speaks of fasting and being pierced by a spear. Now, I think most people, whether they're Christian or not, will recognize the story of early Christianity. Parallels what Ralph Metzner is saying was the basis of the philosophy involving Odin in Europe in the old days. And there's some poetry here, too. And he says, both fasting and self-inflicted pain are classic components of shamanic vision quest of the ordeal type. I think he's misinterpreting, but let me read the poem. He says, I know that I hung on that wind-swept tree, windswept, it's a storm cloud, 9 days and nights, well, we're going to get into the 9 cycle pretty quickly, pierced by the spear, sacrificed to Odin, myself to myself, self-referential, on that great tree whose roots are unknown. And I will skip continuing except for the next part of the poem where he says, neither food nor drink did they give me. I leaned downwards, took up the runes with a cry, then I came down. Odin is able to descend from his voluntary crucifixion when he discovers the runes, the secret symbol language of nature. The runic alphabet, which we'll maybe mention a few more times in some other quotes, is what comes from this legend in the European tradition. Okay, this is from Norse myths, introduced and retold by Kevin Crossley Holland, published by Pantheon Fairy Tale and Folklore Library, and I'll just read from it. He says, a great many mythologies have a tree or column or mountain at the center of the world. A tree or column, a mountain at the center of the world. More specifically, the symbol of 3 cosmic regions connected by a tree, 3 regions connected by the tree, that we find in Norse, I'm not doing good with Norse mythology also appears in Vedic, Indian, and Chinese mythologies. H.R. Ellis Davidson has written of Yggdrasil that the fact that it formed a link between the gods, mankind, the giants, and the dead meant it was visualized as a kind of ladder reaching up to heaven and downwards to the underworld. A ladder reaching up and down, ladder, see the rungs? Rungs. which is going to be on the tetrahelix. Downwards to the underworld. The conception of a road between the worlds is one which is familiar in the beliefs of shamanistic religions. Well, we talked about the idea of a road or a path or a way. And I'm not going to go much more with this because it'll take too much time, but he talks about 9 worlds encompassed by the tree, 9 knights hanging on the tree, 9 magic songs, 9 human beings, 9 animals. There's a whole bunch of 9s in this. If you want to check the references later, I can give them to you, but I think you get the drift. Basically, what Robert John and Brenda Dunn are saying in Margins of Reality, which is an excellent book, which I can summarize very quickly. They did experiments at the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab, published work, which has then been published in a book also. They found that extrasensory effects were real, but within the limits of the uncertainty principle, so they don't violate determinism. Now, I may be overstating that, and you should read the book for yourself, but that's what I got from it. I think it's a beautiful finding, because it means that you can have extrasensory effects and still have logic. It's a quantum mechanical world. Anyhow, he says here that Newton wrote extensively on Bible prophecy, studied the occult symbolism in the structure of Solomon's temple and the Great Pyramid of Cheops, and expended immense effort performing experiments in his private alchemical laboratory. His concept of a universal gravitational force connecting all bodies in the cosmos was clearly influenced by ancient mystical ponderings on the subject. And I'm going to leave it there. Except at the end he says, the mystery by another biographer has observed, Newton regarded the ultimate mechanism of change in the universe to reside in, quote, the mystery by which mind could control matter, unquote. This is from Philosophy, from Thales to Anaxagoras, also from Egyptian Light and Hebrew Fire by Carl Lukart. He's talking about Anaximander, and he says, here we arrived at a crucial point in early Greek philosophy, namely at Anaximander's vision of the cosmogonic process separating out that, in turn, is brought about by an eternal motion in the Apeiron. All things come in return to the Apeiron, the infinite or boundless substratum of the universe. And we're going to find, of course, that our torus literally is the first distinction in an infinite isotropic homogeneous cosmic jello, an Apeiron, an Ein Sof, an infinite nothingness. Quantum vacuum, I think, is its current name. Of special interest is information on Anaximander provided by Theophrastus, I hope I got that right, as originally given by Eusebius. He says that at the birth of this cosmos, a germ of hot and cold was separated off, germ, seed, from the eternal substance. Out of this, a sphere of flame grew, about the vapor surrounding the earth, the vapor, the clouds surrounding the earth, like the arc round a tree. When this was torn away and shut off in certain rings, the sun, moon, and stars came into existence. The sun is the center, the moon is the crescent here, and there's a vortex that carries the stars in the Kepler-Bode theory on the surface of the ball of the torus. Thus, instead of the more concrete first in the cosmos of Nun as the water to which Thales had reference, Anaximander has returned to a more vapor-like and less sensate conceptualization of the Egyptian Nun. From within it he derived the world and then the sun, moon, and stars. All these emanated from the center, successfully contained within rings of fire. Well, we don't have the rings of fire there. Indeed, in the Orthodox Egyptian context, these fiery emanational rings provide a rational pattern for visualization. Oh, wait a minute. A rational pattern for visualization, seeing a pattern of letters in one's mind's eye, a path of meditation? Maybe, maybe. Atom was the central primeval hill sun, from whence all lesser realities came. These successive emanations, spewing from the hill sun center, puff forth as rings of fire, like a playful smoker may blow smoke rings that emanate. And I'm skipping a little. There too, the Godhead's emissions are mentioned as fire or as the light of Ra. And at the very end of this little quote, the dynamic link between Atum and Ra, earthy hill and ecstatic fire emanation, is in the later generation of Enneadian gods depreciated from Shub to Gub, Shu to Geb, thus to Father Earth. He's talking about an Aeneagon of Egyptian gods or god ideas. And the Aeneagon, again, is just a cycle of 9. And as we're going to see repeatedly in these models, we're going to be looking at these cycles of 9. The Hebrew alphabet with 27 letters is 3 layers of cycles of 9. The hypersphere, defined by the 27 lines that solve the general cubic equation, also produces 3 layers of 9. This is from Coxeter's model of the polytope 221. I think in the interest of a smooth transition, I'm going to mention the allegory of Plato's cave, which I'm going to hope to read you at the end of the discussion from this little discussion here, where he's talking about the allegory of Plato's cave as relating to an ego-death experience, which is, of course, part of what this is all about. This would be Plato's cave. Here is the sun. Here's the earth plane. If we were standing here, the sun, we would cast shadows on the wall of the cave. Where did they get the models from? We discussed models of the cyclicity of life, these solar cycle zodiacs, druidic principles of worshiping sacred trees and growing things, and the Futhark, the druidic alphabet, Celtic alphabet, matches these living processes also. Each culture comes up with a different cyclic process to represent important considerations. But we all have the same database. We've all got hands, we've all got bodies, we all have internal spiritual experience, one way or another. Sometimes you have to fall off a donkey and hit your head. Sometimes you take a psychedelic. Sometimes you do a breathing exercise. But it's accessible to all. We all experience the hero's journey, the 7 ages of man, Shakespeare's 7, as we go through life. And we all observe the heavens. In fact, observing the heavens is another one of those technologies that we know the ancients had a lot of. The Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Sumerians, the Greeks. Everybody observes the heavens. You got it. You want to know when to plant your crops. Well, if you observe the heavens, here's Keith Critchlow, but there were another number of other people involved. This, by the way, is the 3-5 torus knot from a math book. This is from Plane Algebraic Curves by people's names I can't pronounce, published in Basel, Switzerland. The 3-5 torus knot. This is the 3-4 torus knot. It's got 4 lobes and 3 intersections. This is the 3-5 torus knot turned inside out. It makes half of it, the other half down there. Put the 2 together and you get the 3-10 knot. This is the form that most tightly correlates the first letters of the text of Genesis. It's the simplified version of what we started with. Looks like an apple, doesn't it? It even has a little womb in the middle. And a womb really does have these swirl forms around it. You can actually see those kind of striations in living things in a womb. There's a book on that I can refer you to if you want. This is, I have a icosahedron in the middle, but this is also the 3-5 knot. It's got 5 points and 3 crossings for each one. So these are our baskets that we're weaving. These are our wreaths. These are our, again, from a Christian perspective, this would be a crown of thorns. There's other names for these in Kabbalistic literature. They're described as baskets. Where'd they get them from? Well, let's see. I'll show you what Critchlow did first, because you all know about Critchlow. These are drawings of the precession of the planets. These are torus knots. The one on top is Mars. The one below is Mercury, Mars and Mercury. This one is Venus, Mars, and Jupiter together. All torus knots. And even better, it's a paper that I was given by a fellow that I haven't spoken to in a while, and I hope he doesn't mind my using it, but it's a really fine work. A fellow lives down in San Jose named Terry Alden, and this is copyright Terry Alden, 1991. And this is based on his theory that the Jupiter-Saturn cycle was used as a vernier to set the 25,000-year precessional age, and you might get in touch with him to find out about it. If people want to know how to contact him, I'll give you what I know of his address. Anyhow, this is the Jupiter-Saturn cycle. It's the 1240 torus knot. Divide through by 4, and you get the 310 knot. This is the interactive cycle of Saturn and Jupiter. In the heavens, in the cosmos, in the dome of the heavens above the flat Earth, above the zodiacal plane. And so all that they needed to design these models was to know how to weave baskets and to observe the heavens. They had the technology. Imagine a model of the heavens, a model of the hero's journey, a model of the embryonic growth cycle, all of it a meditational path in your mind. Talk about identifying with that which you're studying.
I know nothing about the Hebrew alphabet. I was wondering if I were looking at modern Hebrew,
Right.
will I?
You'll see these style letters, which are the letters I've used here. These have been stylized and squared off. The idea is that in writing a Torah scroll, the standard of whether the scroll is acceptable, is kosher, is whether a small child can unambiguously read the letters. Letters here, such as the Vav and the Nun, are too close. And if they were drawn sloppily, you could confuse them. So what the rabbis did is to stylize the letters so they could be unambiguously written. These are the older forms. These are the forms that are currently used. But if you look in the Dead Sea Scrolls, you're going to find forms that look more like these. Okay? Anybody else? Yeah.
How certain are you that that those hand forms form the letters? Like, did you do, and how did you do that? Did you sort of experiment a lot?
Experimented a lot. It took many years, and I was trying at first to use a left hand. You see, when I say the morning prayers every morning, I put a tefillin strap on my left arm, and I bind the strap on my hand. So I thought it was my left hand that should make the letters. But you can't do it. You just can't. I mean, I'll tell you, you can try it. You can't get from one letter to another without doing these. You know, it doesn't work. It only works this way. But no, this is work in progress. I would say you can trust 2/3 of these at this point. We've worked on them long enough. But there are some that I am suspicious of. I am not certain of the final letters. And I know the kaf that's on the chart is wrong. But I haven't worked out exactly why it's the other one yet, and so I have to leave the temporary one. This is definitely work in progress, and we need to refine it more before it can be fully used. But there's enough here to play with, to work with. If you want to experience some of this for yourself, you don't really need the models. We're going to make them available. But just lie down in a dark room sometime, maybe you're going to go to sleep, and move your hands around. And notice you'll be able to see them, even if it's a completely dark room or your eyes are closed. And if you've gotten used to making various gestures, put your hands at your sides and visualize that you're moving your hands. Now do it carefully. Humility is very important in doing these things. That way you don't get in trouble. But you can learn something. You can have an experience from that. We are said by people like Castaneda, and I think the Talmud says it also, if you want to have lucid dreams, look at your hand in your dream. This is the dream. We look at our hand here in order to wake up. Right? Okay, please.
Has there been any correlation with yogic positions in?
I haven't done the work. My answer is I'm pretty sure when we've got this refined, we're going to find lots of correlations. But I haven't done any of the work yet.
And do you have any suspicions as to what that might lead to as far as physical ritual or?
If you look, you look a little younger than I am, but I remember the 1950s. They had these Arthur Murray dance studios, and what they would do is they'd teach you to do the waltz or the cha-cha if you didn't choke on it. They'd literally paint footprints on the ballroom floor, and you'd step into the stupid footprints until you stumbled, but you'd learn to do the waltz. The letters are like footprints in your mind. If you can do the exercise, you will have the experience. Spiritual experience is ineffable. You can't describe it in words. So a sacred text that's just a story can only tell you that some prophet might have existed and might have had an experience, but what he experienced, who knows? But a text that's a formal language, a language that specifies motion, not only motion of your hands or a dance outside, but a motion you can also see, feel, That's a yoga. You follow that path and do that dance, and your consciousness will change. There isn't a quote that I typed up. I didn't bring the quotation. This is very important. This is from a book on mathematics. Here it is. This is from V.I. Arnold, and it's quoted from his book Catastrophe Theory. It's a Springer Verlag, page 26. I think you can get it at Cody's. It's not worth it for this one line. This is a story of catastrophe theory, part of chaos theory, modern mathematics. And he gets to this point where he says, for instance, it has been suggested that different phonemes of speech are different attractors of a sound-producing dynamical system. When you put a smile on your face, it's been demonstrated, you produce certain neurotransmitters that make you feel better. It can't be a snide smile, it's got to be a genuine smile, so you can't fake it anyway. The point is that when you do certain things, it feels a certain way. And when you make a sound or move your hand to relieve a tension, then you're dissipating that energy in that motion. You're transforming it from a psychic state to a physical state, or vice versa. Makes sense. So that if you went through a sequence of feelings or visualizations and coordinated it with a dance, with motion, with breathing, with chanting, with the whole gamut, then you make yourself part of what you're discussing, what you're describing. You make yourself part of this process of life, this transcendental process. You stretch yourself between heaven and earth. The rabbis teach that the only connection between Chachma and Bina, Chachma being internal wisdom, Bina being external understanding, are the letters of the alphabet. That's in Kaplan's book, one of Kaplan's books. Yeah, please.
Then have you played around with the different sizes of the letters in the Torah, or some of the things like in Numbers you have backwards noons and stuff? Is that a reversal of the meditation? Is that
I do not know.
gestures, smaller gestures?
Don't know. Our MERU Foundation is not very well funded. It's just basically the people that are in this room that are doing the work, myself, my wife Cynthia, Bill Haber, and Hannah Ackerman, who is over there, I think. And we don't have the resources to do everything. I have a stack of index cards about 3 feet high at this point, 4 feet high, whatever, of things that I should be checking out that you can't do everything. So if you know anybody who wants to do some more of this work and will volunteer, that's great. There's a lot of things to be checked out. No, I don't know. I don't know how far the coding goes. The statistical tests show it goes through all 5 books of Moses. My indication is that there's definitely coding as far as the story of the Garden of Eden in Genesis and probably into the middle of Exodus. But beyond that, I don't know. It's my guess that Rabbi Akiba's meditation, this is a guess, this is a speculation. I'm labeling it that because I want you to distinguish from what I've been telling you before, which is pretty much stuff I'm confident in. I think that the Pardes meditation, the one that takes you from here to where Mashiach is, this central point where the sun, S-U-N, resides, is the sequence of letters from the beginning of Genesis to the story of the Garden of Eden, to Pardes. Pardes, paradise, Garden of Eden, same in Hebrew. I'm not sure that's true, and I can't do it yet because I don't know all the letters well enough. But the models suggest that's the case. The most common letter skip pattern that the statisticians have found in the texts of the books of Moses is a skip of 49 or 50 letters. The column is 99 tetrahedra long. 49, 49, and 1 in the middle. Each of these hands is 49 tetrahedra long with 1 at the tip. If you wrote the Torah out on this scroll, Torahs are written on scrolls, then the letters that form these 49 letter patterns would line up in concentric circles like jewels on a Fabergé egg. Now, wait a minute, that's not so far-fetched. Oh, I didn't bring little model. I always forget one model. You know, in the ancient world, in the Roman and Greek world, if you wanted to send a secret message to your general, you'd take a rod, a shaft, and you'd wrap it with a leather strap. And you'd write across the windings your message. And you'd pull the rod out and unfurl the strap, and you'd have garbled letters. The only way you can put it back together again is to wind it on a similar diameter shaft. So we know that they used this system of winding on a shaft. Wait a minute. It's like a shaft with windings on it to me. Huh. Winding on a shaft was a technology that they used for coding. If we didn't use an ordinary shaft, but used this shaft and wrote the Torah on it, that would encode it. And maybe they started from a pattern of letters that then got interleaved, woven, embroidered. Let me read you that quotation. That was the last quotation. Let's put this away. I've got to find the quotation, of course. Here it is. This is from R.A. Kaplan's translation of Exodus, a living Torah. It's a perfectly standard kosher Orthodox Jewish translation. You'll find it in King James too, I'm sure. Exodus 35:30 to 35. Moses said, this is in Exodus where he's talking about building the tabernacle. Moses said to the Israelites, God has selected Bezalel, son of Uri, son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, and has filled him with divine spirit of wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. Chachma, Bina, and Da'at, which is another level. 3 levels. 3 levels. And a talent for all types of craftsmanship. He will thus be able to devise plans, make up plans, work in gold, silver, and copper, cut stones to be set, and do carpentry and other skilled work. The words in Hebrew for gold, silver, and copper. The word for silver means the palm of the hand. The word for gold is the same as this golden sun point, the seed in the center, golden grain, sun is golden. The word for copper is the same as the word for snake. There's the snake, gold and silver and brass. So Bezalel is making a tabernacle, I showed you the ark picture, out of gold and silver and brass, out of this projective principle. And then it says in the next section, God also gave to him in the Oholiab, son of Achisamach, of the tribe of Dan, the ability to teach others. He has granted them a natural talent for all craftsmanship, to form materials, to brocade, to embroider patterns with sky blue, dark red, and crimson wool and fine linen, and to weave. They will thus be able to do all the necessary work in planning. That's it. Those are the skills required to make the model. Simple carpentry, weaving, embroidering. Okay? Next question.
I can't quite see the page that embeds Arthur Young's sevenfold in the 9, and I'm wondering if you're correlating particular letters of the alphabet.
I am. What I'm doing is saying what Arthur has shown is that there's a turn, and that there's this progressive sequence where there's a goal projected and a goal attained, moves by charge, uses charge to move, takes on a center, throws off centers. There's a symmetry to that. I'm saying the goal projected is this birthing, breaking open, the first distinction. The goal attained is head, encompassment, closure. Logically the same relationship. You see what I'm saying? Breaking open and encircling are exactly the same symmetrical relationship as goal projected and goal attained. Likewise, after you open, in a natural sequence, follows the same logical order, you have relationship. The camel, the gimel, the action. Opposite relationship, action within limits. On the other side, we have projection, uses charge to move, projection. Same logical relationship. Here, takes on its own center. Here, throws off centers. Throws off centers is like multiplying, like a seashell opening up, layer on layer, spiral on spiral. Takes on its own center is just like the delta. It has the river coming down the center and it spreads out around it. It makes its own center, defines its own center. So you can do this in many different ways, and you have to go through it lots of times in order to get it to match up, to get the right sense of it. But it's really no different than what Arthur, I hope I'm not misstating it, did over here by putting these other names on these functions on the Rosetta Stone. I mean, there's very good reasons for associating ml squared t squared with work or fact. There's very good reasons for associating the ml squared over t function with action or impulse. At first glance, you wouldn't know to do that, but if you think it through, this is very logical, and it maps the same way. and you'll have to trust that I did my work. If you want more details, you have to come over and we'll talk. Okay?
I'm still curious what the what are the mechanics you go through to try to find this match? I mean, do you have to put in vowels?
No, I have paid no attention to the vowels, nor to the word divisions, nor to the cantillation marks, because as far as we know, the original text didn't have vowels, didn't have word divisions, didn't have cantillation marks. However, I'm certain that when they did add these extra layers, they enhanced the definition, and we'll learn more when we do examine them. I just haven't done it. The sequence as it exists on all, you look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, it's just all run together. And there's no vowels, and there's nothing. And you have to know where you can't tell where words end unless you introduce the final letters. In Hebrew, there's 5 letters that have final forms. If you see them, you know you have the end of a word. But the final letters weren't used in the old Ivri script. They were added after the Babylonian exile, or reconstructed from what was originally there in Moses' time. That's an open debate. So this is a result of a kind of distillation process over the last, it's 15 years now almost. I mean, it's been since 1980, it's 11 years full time. And I've been doing this since 1968. So it's a distillation process.
Well, have you, for instance, written down the Torah, this part that you think is based on this?
I've looked at the first.
So as to place it, leaving gaps if you had to, so as to place it in, going every 49th or whatever.
No, I didn't do that work. That work was done by statisticians at UCLA and later at Hebrew University. And that's published work. If you want, give me a call during the week and I can send you a copy of some of it. You can look at it. My guess is that these are tenured statisticians with reputations as good mathematicians, so their math is probably good. Their philosophy is thin because they're jumping to conclusions that are unwarranted. But the math is good, as far as I know. I didn't do that.
I wondered if you found anything in the current, recent revelations of Dead Sea Scrolls that fit into your theories in a meaningful way.
I haven't examined the Dead Sea Scrolls in any great detail myself. My understanding of the stories is that they either presage or echo the gospel stories to a large degree. And there's a lot of religious debates about what that means and what its significance is. They also seem to say that Judaism was much more varied than we think it was, and which we know was the case. There were all kinds of individual groups that were doing their own thing at that time. My guess is that we're not going to understand the meaning of the allegorical discussions in the Dead Sea Scrolls any better than we understand the meaning of the allegorical discussions in Kabbalistic texts until we apply some of these mathematical models to those texts. But I haven't done it. It should be done.
Stan,
Yeah.
from one particular
I'll keep
point of
going.
view, let me see if I have it right. What you're suggesting is that if indeed what was going on with the formation of the language and the way it was put together, and it's taken in its original meaning, that the reading of it correctly will induce an ontological shift
Yes.
in terms of consciousness, and will be tantamount to arriving at a point of view or a Weltanschauung, a participatory one, in which would essentially be that which was meant by the coming of the Messiah.
Yes. If I'm right, Moses comes down from Mount Sinai and writes down his experience in this formal language. He describes step by step the dance God puts him through. And if we can step into Moses' shoes, so to speak, I know he takes his shoes off, but step into his shoes in the Arthur Murray dance sense, into the letters he writes in his Torah, then we will be present back at Mount Sinai, which is what Judaism teaches. But you have to go through the level, the word level of the Torah. There's 4 levels of the Torah, and I know you know that, but not everyone knows that. The superficial level is the story, which is what the fundamentalists believe. The next level is the discussion level, so-called, no, actually it's a hint level called remez, which is more details. Then there's a level called drash, which is discussion. There is a statement here I didn't get to where one of these commentators is saying the word druid comes from the Hebrew word drash. They were roving bardic commentators who brought this Israelite teaching out of the Middle East and into Northern Europe. Now, I didn't get to that quote. And then the bottom level is sod, which means foundation. we're dealing, I hope, with the foundation level. Pshat, which is the simple level, Remez, the hints, Drash, the discussion, and Sod, the foundation, together spell Pardes. If you integrate the 4 levels, some could say the 4 dimensions of the Torah, then you may have the experience. We are running out of time. I wanted to get one thing in. We're working on a little book that is going to give you the hand gestures on a full page each with descriptions, and I'm hoping to make them available soon so people can practice with it. So I just thought I'd show you the mock-up on it. Also, I didn't get back to Plato's Cave Revisited, which I'd wanted to, but I will summarize the point of it. Basically, he's saying that the Platonic stories of Plato's Cave is also the story of the use of sacred geometry to initiate an ego-death experience, as the description of an ego-death experience. That if one doesn't have this self-abnegating experience at a very deep level, one is not righteous enough. One doesn't reach this level. A tzaddik, a righteous person in Judaism, is said to sacrifice themselves to the great flame in their meditation every night before they go to sleep. And then, of course, they're reborn every morning. Sounds also familiar. Another death and resurrection story. A person at the level, I use the example because it's not so controversial, of a Mother Teresa, a saintly person, sort of does that automatically. They're at that level of humility. They let go. They just keep letting go all the time. They don't play ego games. So if you could integrate all the levels of the Torah, as it says at Sinai, the people heard the visions and saw the sounds, or something like that. It was a case of synesthesia, where the senses were mixed, where they were all together. It's at that level of abstraction, that level of meditation. We really are running out of time. Do we have time for one more question, do you think? One more. Okay. Anybody? All right, you get it.
You mentioned earlier about coleridge and opium, and I wondered if you speculated on the possible role of psychoactive shamanic medicines in
Sure.
the discovery or experience of visions of this type of thing.
I think it looks a little like a mushroom. You take a mushroom into your mouth, and the mushroom form blossoms in your mind. The Egyptians, we know, had ergotamine from rye ergot. They also, we think, practice suffocation rituals in these coffers, which can induce near-death experiences. I'm sure that they had their own version of holotropic breathing. They definitely knew about ritual dancing and chanting. So yeah, this is work in progress, and there will be more. Please stay in touch with us. We need all of your help. If you've got questions or comments, we want them. I think we'd better stop because we're going to run out of tape. So I thank you all for coming. Those of you who celebrate St. Patrick's Day have an especially good one. And perhaps we'll do this again next year. Thank you. Well, they seem to like it. Thank you.